And we are live. So very excited today to have Elisa Filman, who is a partner at Rodman Employment Law, a employment law practice that focuses on both both the employee and employer side of employment law in the Boston area. And Elisa, so glad to have you on the show today, and we would love to hear what is on your mind.
Oh, well, thank you all for having me. It's great to be here. Great to talk about one of my favorite things, which is employment law, because if you're an employment law nerd, you relish any opportunity to talk about employment law. So where do I start?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I am not an employment law nerd, but I am interested in the topic.
Likewise, I'm not an employment law nerd, and I would love to know, because I think it's a super important subject, especially when it comes to smaller businesses.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And maybe by the end of our conversation, you guys will consider yourselves employment law nerds too. I tend to think about like how at the end of the calendar year, and really at various points throughout the year, there's a lot of things that happen with your employees, and maybe you're making changes about who's going to work for you next year, laying people off. Maybe you're doing kind of end of year books and other stuff and getting ready for new laws that go into effect in January. So there's just a lot happening when you think about the world of employment law at this time of year.
So it's interesting, as you were saying that, I don't know that I've ever thought of this before, but do you also notice that employers get themselves into more trouble at this time of year because of all like the holiday parties and all that kind of stuff?
That actually is a big problem, because everybody knows that you're not supposed to, your employees are not supposed to behave badly at parties. But there's more parties, and maybe there's alcohol at certain parties, and people kind of let their guard down. And there is definitely an uptick in complaints of sexual harassment following the holiday party circuit, if you will.
Yeah.
I had
never thought about that.
Going all the way up to the top in this country. I'll leave the politics behind, but that may be a problem across the board. Anyway.
That's in the workplace, outside the workplace. Holiday parties, can be bad news.
So here's a question I have. How does employment law, just on this same topic of like people going off the books or whatever, like if it's an after party, say, and you're not at work, you're not at a work function, but something happens there, like how does that work out? Like what's the line?
It's an interesting analysis, really, because there's kind of like several lines, right? Like, are people required to be at the party? Is it who's paying for the party? Is it after the party, the after party of the party, or people were, kind of exceeding the bounds of what the employer originally intended? Or is it very much like, we were in the cafeteria, we were drinking too much, everybody was required to be there. So whether or not it's the employer's responsibility has a lot to do with kind of the context and the circumstances surrounding it.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe we just have people behave better. Might be the best way to handle that.
Yes, and that would be, if we had a magic wand, that'd probably be number one. Although maybe then I wouldn't have a job because I wouldn't have to help people when they've gotten themselves.
No, Lisa, you will always have a job. Trust me. I have a slightly different question, but also a big trending topic is the world was remote for a while entirely, right? And now we are more or less hybrid, and a lot of employers are calling people back in, I wouldn't necessarily say aggressively, but firmly, right? What kind of trends do you see, and how is it reflected from the employment law side?
I think a lot of the bigger companies are making kind of vast changes. Everybody back in the office, you're back in the office Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every other Friday. It's impacting people who don't live anywhere near an office, so what was once okay to live, out in the remote, whatever, but now, you're getting called back to an office in Boston that you've never worked in can be a challenge. And we'll get calls from people who are like, do I have to go back? Can they do this to me? And the answer is pretty much yes. Obviously not across the board if there's like an employment agreement or something like that that says otherwise, or if there's, more to the story, like they're picking you out of everyone and targeting you to go back to the office because of some, protected class that you're a part of, then there might be something else. But otherwise, I mean, what the employer says goes. And if you don't want to work there anymore, then get a job elsewhere is pretty much the message.
Interesting. Actually, I'm going to sort of related to that, since we're talking about kind of interesting recent trends. I keep reading articles about, that I, am like very like I'm a middle management nerd, right? And and so I keep reading these articles about how companies are getting rid of their middle manager layers. And I'm wondering if you are seeing that, because of either AI or technology or whatever it is. Are you seeing an uptick of issues related to that trend?
I wouldn't say that I've noticed that in particular. I think what I've seen, if I had to point to something that I'm seeing more and more in the last couple of weeks, it's large companies doing kind of mass end of year layoffs. So the ones that you think of that are in Boston, they're laying off, a not insignificant portion of their workforce here. So I'm seeing that more than I'm seeing like a targeted, we're going after the middle management, particularly at really it seems to be impacting people across the board from what I've seen.
Got it. And I guess I'll flip that around is, because I'm such a middle management nerd, I'm interested in what are the issues that you see, like, a lot of middle managers are either new leaders or people who haven't been trained to be leaders. What are the things that you see are the biggest issues for them that get people into trouble?
Oh, that's such a good question. And actually, I think it's an even broader point, which is that at least in Massachusetts and really in most states, there are so many laws to comply with when it comes to employment law, laws about wages, laws about discrimination, laws about, leave and what have you. And it's not enough to just know about them or like slap them in your handbook. You also have to train people who are in charge and, train people to react to news of like, hey, I'm coming to you, you're my manager, I have anxiety and depression and, and I'm having trouble with XYZ. A middle manager might be like, oh gosh, that's too bad. And even the most empathetic, kind middle manager might be like, yeah, oh, it's awful. I'm so sorry to hear that. If you're feeling anxiety, like maybe I won't put you on the following projects. Rather than recognizing like, oh, actually, this is a disclosure. This is notice to the employer. I'm wearing the employer hat as a middle manager that, now there's an obligation on the employer's part to react to that disclosure, that notice of a disability or what have you. And so when you don't have the kind of training that you need,
right,
with middle managers, there's so many opportunities to like just mess it up.
Well, I've been a middle manager before, and I never got that training, so it's definitely a problem.
You get it just right now.
Elisa, actually, not just middle managers, but if we can just push this subject forward a little bit, what are like the must-know things for employers when it comes to employment law?
Probably the most important thing to know is that there is so much out there in Massachusetts that governs the relationship between employees and employers. There's more statutes than you would guess, and there's a lot of nuance to them. There's regulations that come out of them, and it's a bit unforgiving. The laws. Some of them are punitive. If an employer doesn't pay wages on time, for example, the wages are automatically tripled, right? So, and that's mandatory. It doesn't matter if it was like, oh, I didn't know, or oh, I made a mistake. That's just what the law is. So any employer who is, kind of going from their, first or second employee and like scaling up is going to want to recognize, hang on, there are things here that I need to, make sure I know and get the right advice and ensure compliance early and train the right people so that we're set and you don't have to worry constantly about like, oh, I'm going to make this decision now. I'm going to, figure it out later. It's better to have, that in the back of your mind. There's always going to be some employment law issue for
if you had to sort of point out the top sort of pitfalls for that. So again, like pulling from Elena's question, but focusing particularly on that 1 to 2, like you're hiring your first and second employee. What are the things that you would advise a company who's just newly hiring people? What are the 3 things or whatever that you would be like, these are the things you got to really keep an eye on?
Yeah, number one would definitely be making sure that wages are being paid properly. So classifying employees as employees when they're working in your business, doing things that are relative to your business, they're most likely employees, not contractors under Massachusetts law. And you have to pay on a schedule, and then you have to provide a copy of the pay stub. And because that law in particular, the Massachusetts Wage Act, is so punitive in nature for noncompliance, you could end up, your business could be gone basically, by making a few mistakes. And I think very often as companies grow, an employer will be like, oh, this is great, I'm going to bring on another employee. We're doing so well. And obviously there's like so much excitement about growing and about, your idea, taking hold, that you sort of put the boring compliance stuff in the back of your mind, understandably. But if there's one topic, it would absolutely be make sure you're doing the wage stuff right. The second would probably be, don't wait too long before putting together an employee handbook and being able to rely on it. Because I'll get calls from some of my employer clients, and they'll say things like, well, what do I do? And I'm like, well, what does your handbook say that is the plan? Well, I don't like what they're doing. Well, is there a policy that you can point to that they violated? And if not, going forward, let's kind of make sure that stuff says what you want it to say, complies, and is actually reflective of the culture. So I think those are probably the 2 most important things.
So, it's interesting. I was listening to a book. I'm going to bear with me for a second, because I'm going to go on like a weird tangent, and then I'll bring it back to employment law. But I was listening to unusual stuff. So I was listening to a book the other day, and one of the things it was talking about was this idea in sort of medical malpractice, which is that when you are more open about mistakes you've made, if basically the hospital says, hey, we made a mistake, we apologize, we own up to it, that they are actually much less likely to get sued, even though the legal advice they typically get is don't deny everything, don't say anything, because it can be used against you. And so I'm wondering, is there something similar to that on the employment side of law, of I'm guessing there is, if companies are sort of nasty, toxic environments, I'm guessing that just leads to more, less, benefit of the doubt. But do you see that in your experience?
Yeah. I think I see the people who call, right? Like the people who reach out, sometimes, they're coming from a toxic environment, on the employee side, they're coming from a toxic environment. They really want to get someone, make someone pay for how they feel. And then there are people who are like, well, I really don't, I feel bad about this, but, XYZ happened. And it definitely comes from the culture, right? So if the culture is the kind of environment where people are supported and people feel like they have a say, and, other things that are like the intangibles, I think that they're much less likely to end up in litigation than the opposite. Of course, you can't necessarily control the culture of a huge organization, especially when you have like tons of managers, maybe all over the place, right? But yeah, I think that definitely has an effect.
Yeah, it's an interesting, coming from a very large company, Cracker Barrel was a restaurant company with 660 restaurants and whatever. And, sometimes, part of the problem is, like, to your point, like, you can't there's only so much you can control the environment in each of those individual stores, right? And so you could end up with a situation where the whole company is getting sort of taken down, or attacked because of something that a bad manager was doing, right? And so the ability of like an individual within the organization to essentially become a bad representative of the organization, even if the organization doesn't act that way. I guess that speaks to this idea of, it pays to be nice, but it also pays to not allow toxic behavior,
Yeah, for sure. You can never control everyone. Some of it is the cost of doing business, right? Like if you want the benefit of employees, of having people do, the work for you, there's going to be the other side, which is you can't control everything, anymore, employment law related or not. I think there's another point in what you said too, which is that when an employer, hires someone to be a manager and does certain things, they do give them that hat to wear, right? That like you're part of management, you're part of decision making, and it exposes the employer more to liability, right? If that person does something wrong. But a lot of the statutes, at least in Massachusetts, expose that individual person to liability too, right? So they very often would have no idea. Like Jeff, you as a manager at Cracker Barrel, not in the restaurant, but like in the, you could have been sued for discrimination, if you had been the one that said something, which is not something that necessarily everybody thinks of, right? They think, oh no, it's the company, it's the company, it's the company. Well, there are, the bad apple can also be sued too. And so Jeff, I'm assuming that you're not the bad apple, but
I hope not.
He's a good apple.
I'm the only one who really works for him. I guess that's what I need to say.
What did you say, Eric?
Because I'm the only one who works for you at Twinning Edge. Like maybe it's up to me.
I feel like we work for each other.
I know. But I have a question. I want to change
to write a handbook, Eric, for you. So
okay.
That's right.
You probably need one. So I want to change the topic for a second, because this is one that that comes up for me when I do consulting, and certainly I've seen this as an issue throughout this non-compete issue. And I know there's a lot of changes. I don't know where it's going. It was probably going in one direction in October, and maybe it's going in a different direction in December now. But can you tell what's the story right now with non-compete in Massachusetts, and how is that all playing out in the legal side?
So we have our own law in Massachusetts. Like there's a few laws that are relative to non-competes. Like if you're a physician or if you do radio broadcasting, for example, those are their own laws that say that you can't have a non-compete. But the general workforce population, we have a non-compete statute in Massachusetts that went into effect in October 2018, which means that anything that was signed in October 2018 or after is governed by that law. And it really restricts, and it really makes it difficult, not impossible, but difficult to have an enforceable non-compete, which means that a lot of employers are not interested in kind of jumping through all the hoops to do it. And they're being much more selective about who they're giving non-competes to. Probably the most important thing to know about that is you have to give somebody something in exchange for signing a non-compete now. So it's not enough that like, hey, you sign here and you're, getting the privilege of working for me in exchange. Now there's more to it. You have to pay them.
But there's still kind of a coercive element to that, right? Especially if you need a job, it's like, well, either sign this or you don't get a job. And my experience with that is sometimes the putative, this is what we're paying you for, that doesn't equal the cost that it will actually could incur down the line. In other words, like, oh, here's 5 more stock options does not make up for loss of work. Never mind the fact that if you lost your work, you probably lose your stock options anyway. So it's like, I don't know. It seems like there's some, fudging around with that.
You're right. I mean, the law has leveled the playing field a little bit, but it's certainly not equal. There's a power imbalance there, absolutely, especially when it's difficult to find a job or difficult to find a job in a particular industry, or you're excited about a particular company. Some of those agreements can be negotiated. They can be negotiated when you're first presented with one, and depending on how important you are to the next employer, they might be willing to negotiate. Or they can be negotiated at the end, depending on how things went and what the reason for the departure is. And then there's this kind of third category of, you might have been presented with a non-compete, but it's possible that the non-compete doesn't comply with the law anyway. And so you can sort of like, oh, well, I guess we'll just wait and see, like, how's this going to go? And the FTC, you may know about this as well. The FTC proposed basically a complete ban on non-competes that was supposed to go into effect in September. But a judge in Texas said, absolutely not. This exceeds the bounds of your authority. And so that's not happening right now. But that proposed law would say that employers can't present a non-compete that they know to be unenforceable. So one strategy, for employers might be to, give an employee something that kind of looks like a non-compete, smells like a non-compete, but at the end of the day, they know they can't enforce it. They know that it's not legit, doesn't comply with the law. Well, the FTC rule would have, cut that off at the knees. But
so you said we were going to become employment law nerds. So I'm going to ask you a really employment law nerdy question right now, because I'm just fascinated to know the answer to this question.
Are you asking for like a citation to a statute?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to put it
32 USC.
No, my question is if it, given remote work, like if somebody lives in Massachusetts but works for a company in, I don't know, Texas or whatever it is, which law governs? Like, are they?
This is starting to turn into like a bar exam hypothetical. And he travels to Texas every other month. But there's a team in Massachusetts, right? Yeah, no, it's complicated. Some laws are going to apply based on where that employee lives. Some laws apply based on where he works. And then it's possible that some of the laws in Texas might apply because, Texas has an interest in their companies following their own laws. So it can be a whole, hullabaloo.
Yeah. So that was a nerdy question.
This is definitely what keeps Elisa employed forever, right?
Yeah, and it sounds to me like if you are a new employer, please bring in a good advisor and legal advisor to help you out, because this just sounds very complicated and not intuitive. You need a specialist.
Speaking of advisors, Jeff, do we have our AI advisor ready to jump in with some questions?
You do. I think, Elisa, it looked like you were about to respond to Elena.
Oh, no, sorry. That's okay. That's okay. I'm looking forward to what your AI friend has.
Right. So I will tell you that I'm not, usually what I ask is, would you like an absurd question first or a thought-provoking question first? But for some reason, this time around, and all I asked ChatGPT was, what are 10 funny questions to ask an employment lawyer? It's actually really funny. Often they're not so much funny. So I might read a couple of these and we may just chuckle over them, because I don't know if there's any.
Go for it.
The first one was, if my boss eats my lunch from the fridge, can I file a claim for emotional damage?
Well, it depends what kind of sandwich it is.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Just peanut butter and jelly, then we don't believe you.
Well, maybe it was a special religious meal, and that could be discrimination. I don't know.
Oh wow! See, there we go.
I'll ruin anything,
Wait, all right. So I'm going to do 3, and then we'll maybe we can share the rest of them with you later. But so number 2, I'm just reading them in order because they're just all equally hilarious. This one is, can I legally call my worker out for using Comic Sans in a professional email?
Absolutely. Actually, that's a felony. So.
And the last one I will ask you, which I think we will all agree is a really good question, is, if a meeting could have been an email, is that considered false imprisonment?
Yeah.
So I did a good job this week for being funny.
Questions from ChatGPT, none of which probably are deserving of an answer, other than they're funny.
No, I like that ChatGPT's got some sass.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what you can, push. I was telling Eric, I won't go into the details, but I was having a very sort of philosophical conversation with ChatGPT last night about a certain Supreme Court case that is in front of the Supreme Court yesterday, and I was asking some questions because I was very confused by some of the things that apparently the justices were asking. And by confused, I mean I thought they were wrong. And so I was just asking ChatGPT, like, what were they referring to? What are they talking about? And we were just having these, I was just having this back and forth, like actual conversation. It would say, well, maybe it meant like this. And I'm like, but wouldn't that be, and so we were just having this interesting conversation. I don't know. I feel like, after we talk to ChatGPT for its questions, we always end up asking about ChatGPT and AI, but it's a good question. Are you using AI in any of the work that you do these days?
A little bit. We use AI sometimes as a guide for, locating sources or that kind of thing. We don't use it to, practice law for us. You know what I mean? Like, you probably have all heard the story of the lawyer who, asked ChatGPT to put together a brief and filed the brief without reading it, and then all of the citations turned out to be totally made up. So I think it's, lawyers need to be really, really careful about that. Everyone should be careful, but especially, lawyers in court. So a little bit, but I think, we'll see where it goes and how, and how it continues to impact things. I think I'm excited to see what it can do. I don't trust it yet to do, things that I would like it to do.
Yeah.
I feel like can you find precedent cases that are of interest that you may not have known about, or you still wouldn't use it for that?
We use other legal research tools. So I might ask, like, is there anything, anything out of Massachusetts that says XYZ? And then maybe it would come up with something that are more traditional legal research sources, that search for case law and statutes and that kind of thing, might come up with something, or might come up with a news article that is relevant or interesting. But no, I mean, it's really no replacement for that, at least not yet. I'm sure that one day it will get to that point. Right now, I primarily use ChatGPT to ask who's the best employment law lawyer in the Boston area. And I'm going to keep doing it until it says my name.
Thank you. I was going to say, until you train it to say it's Elisa.
Exactly. I'm like, wrong again, ChatGPT.
Well, I'm going to jump back to something you were talking about earlier, which is, one use though might be like, could you use it to either draft or edit a employee handbook, or whatever, like, I don't know.
That gives me pause, because there are templates, right, for handbooks, and it's a great jumping off point. I think even clients that come to us that say like, oh, well, I want to make sure that, we have a good handbook. Like, don't hire a lawyer to draft a handbook for you. Get a template, go through the template, make it seem like what you want, and then give it to an employment lawyer to make sure that it complies, that it's like, So the same thing could be said for using ChatGPT in that way. I just wouldn't be like, publish, send all,
Right. You don't want to. GPT got it right.
Yeah.
I just want to say, since you said it, you wanted to recognize you as the top employment lawyer. I did just put your name and say, can you tell me about Elisa Filman into ChatGPT? And it does say her professional excellence has been recognized by her peers. She was selected to the Super Lawyers Rising Star list from 2015 to 2023, et cetera, et cetera. So it knows a little bit about how amazing you are. It's good.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll take it.
Well, Elisa was typing it all in yesterday night. So
I was up all night. Well, you were having your existential conversation.
But you got your point across, so it's amazing.
So I have a question about, so people are on social media all the time, and they have jobs, and their social media personas are not always the same as their jobs. We always hear about these stories of a teacher with an OnlyFans account or whatever it is, and then they get fired, and or somebody has political ideas and that becomes a problem or whatever. But how does that fit into your understanding of like how companies should act? What's actually reasonable? How do you think about that line of the degree to which your company can control your personal life through the social media sort of restraint.
Almost every employment relationship in Massachusetts is at will, right? So there will be people that have actual contracts, like physicians, for example, might have an actual contract. But otherwise, it's just, you can quit at any time. We can fire you at any time. The only exception is if there's like an unlawful basis for that termination. And so if someone were to, say, get fired because they posted something insane on social media that was offensive and whatever, or not, just different than what the employer's beliefs were, unless there's some exception that applies to that situation, the employer can terminate, right? And so if somebody had posted something about some part of their identity that was protected under the law, there might be something there. But otherwise, when you go out there and you post on social media, you have to be willing to be held accountable for what you said. And that's probably a good lesson for most people. But especially in the context of employment, like when you are out there, you're kind of holding yourself out, depending on the role and depending on your seniority and all of that. You are reflective of your employer. So your employer may not like some of the things you said. Some states have different rules, like Connecticut has employees have the right to free speech, sort of. I'm not a Connecticut lawyer, but there are some states that have different things. But Massachusetts, if you say something stupid, you're kind of out of luck.
But I guess my concern is that if you say something that is stupid, but only in the eyes of a particular political group, or, in other words, like you say something that many, many people would find to be perfectly reasonable, and then, given our extreme divide in politics in this country right now, I feel like that scenario is probably getting more and more likely to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. But political, feelings or membership in as I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, whatever, it's not protected. It's not part of a protected class. Again, if you're saying something about yourself, like, I, as a, Jewish woman, whatever, like maybe there's, the possibility that your employer is reacting to that, the part about being in that protected class. But just talking about your feelings about somebody else or somebody else's protected class isn't enough. It's got to be, otherwise it's just, agree to disagree. And unfortunately, you are not the one holding the power.
Right.
Other than the fact that you could quit, I guess.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, what a downer.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, no, it's a little unfortunate, and it's unfortunate that there is this there is a sort of a self-editing that I think that goes on to a large degree. Maybe sometimes that's a good thing, but we are at 33 minutes now, and so we're over time, but this is, as promised, Elisa, this has flown by, and it's been a fantastic conversation. But before we go, we always like to have everybody go around and give one thing they want to leave the audience with. If you haven't watched any of our episodes to the end in the past, you don't know, but I always make the guest go first, and you have no time to think about it. So what is one thing, Elisa, that you want to leave the audience with?
I want to leave the audience with, the idea that you don't know what you don't know. So if you're, scaling up your business, if you're hiring employees, if you're even thinking about hiring employees, stop, recognize that it's a good time to get some advice from someone who knows that world. And but otherwise, I think it's so exciting when businesses are scaling. So congratulations to that person, but also you don't know what you don't know.
Awesome. I will jump in next and give my one thing. But before I do that, Elisa, what is the best place for people to reach you if they would like to learn more about employment law or work with you?
Definitely, you can send me an email, which, it's on the screen. So you can send me an email there. You can also check out the website, rodmanemploymentlaw.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. If, are people still on LinkedIn? I'm just kidding.
For those people listening, that's Elisa.Filman at rodmanemploymentlaw.com, one word, with Rodman Employment Law. So, all right, Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. I have learned a ton. I do feel like I became more of a employment law nerd than I thought I was. But definitely will build on your point about um, you don't know what you don't know. And especially, I think, for folks who are sort of new to managing people, whether they are newly promoted managers or they are, to your point, in startups and growing businesses, et cetera, that's not, being open to like, hey, I better figure out what it is that I'm not aware of, would probably be a good idea. So, and I will pass it to Elena.
Yeah, so I definitely would second what you guys were saying. And even though you did educate us some, I'm still feeling that it is a vast field where we really, as business people, need a lot of help. I also learned about the importance of the employee handbook. And it is really interesting that I've worked for a lot of small and medium-sized companies, and I'm just not sure if I have ever seen one used in action well. So it really is a great learning for small and mid-sized businesses that, put your policies and procedures down and kind of get organized. So I love that.
And I learned today that Jeff is an employment law nerd. No, just kidding.
Mission accomplished.
I learned something about Jeff. No, what actually I do think it's important is this idea of don't, as a new company, you do have to pay attention and don't skimp just because it's exciting to expand. You got to keep in mind that, particular, whether it's your state law or whatever it is, that you just got to make sure you've got your bases covered and that you aren't making assumptions. And I guess that goes along with you don't know what you don't know, which is why I guess Elisa Rodman employment law exists. And I'm sure you guys would be happy to get companies have come to you and talk to you about their concerns and considerations. So thank you again, Elisa. This was a really interesting conversation. As Jeff and I build our company, we are hoping to eventually get to the point where we're hiring people that are not genetically identical. And so, it'd be really interesting to understand, it's definitely an topic of high interest to us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you guys, and I'm glad to hear that there are now more employment law nerds in the world.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.